Hello again. This is Josh Kahr at The Real Angle, and today we're speaking with Howard Altshuler, partner in charge for construction and real estate at Weaver, and we're going to be talking about the state of the accounting industry. We're going to be talking about the Fort Worth real estate market and whatever else comes into our heads. How are you today, Howard?
I'm great, Josh. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful. Thanks for coming on board. What I really enjoy about this is every week I get to talk to someone interesting about industry stuff that would bore my wife to tears if I engaged her on said topics. So, you know, it, it,
Birds of a
it
feather.
it gives me an excuse to talk about this stuff. So yeah, so let's get into it. So just first off, just basic stuff I always like to get out of the way. Physically, where in the world are you based?
So I'm based in our Fort Worth office. So for those of you who are not familiar, which I hope there's no one in that boat at this point, that's Dallas Fort Worth area, North Texas. So I've been based in Dallas Fort Worth area for probably about 30 years now, with a stint overseas. Grew up in Houston, and born in the Northeast, but claim to be pretty Texan.
Yeah, it is funny with you folk. I find you almost have to get to second generation before anyone fully believes. But that's good. That's good.
Well, as we like to say, I wasn't born here, but got here as fast as I could.
There we go. There you go. Well, as a New York native, I have great respect for Dallas Fort Worth area. I dated a woman in college who was from Dallas, and we both mutually believed that we were from the center of the world, and we decided that we would not engage in that conflict. The relationship ended for other reasons, but the New York versus Dallas conversation that was not one that would have ended well for either party. So it's good. It's good. But nonetheless, big fan of going down to that neck of the woods. So yeah, let's talk about the Fort Worth market a little bit. What's going on in your world, so to speak?
I mean, it's on fire is probably the best way to put it. One of the advantages that we've had in Fort Worth, compared to our brethren and even in Dallas and in Houston and such, is we didn't have quite the level of overbuilding that plagues some of the other Texas cities,
Hmm,
and so as a result, we're actually in a boom market, even believe it or not, in the office market. There's some new office buildings that are going up in the area where our office is, which is just west of downtown. There's a couple of companies, Crescent Real Estate, Goldenrod. They're doing some deals in the area, and it's going really well. We're also fueled by the fact that Texas as a whole is a net grower of jobs and people. We have a
sure.
good political environment where it's great to do business, and people take advantage of that. North of Fort Worth, we have the Alliance area, which is the Hillwood development, where they started that out as primarily started as an industrial area, and now it's grown to have residential and office as well. That's a huge driver of the economy here. And probably the one of the biggest advantages that we have here in Fort Worth is there's just lots and lots of room.
Yeah.
If you
So
go,
sorry, you hit on a bunch of few things which I want to sort of tackle
Mhm.
one at a time. Let me start with the office market because I want to get to not to cut in. I definitely want to get it to the growth issues,
Mhm, mhm.
but office market. So the office market in most of America right now is, dare I say, apocalyptic. I mean, it's anywhere between really bad or really bad. I got an email literally yesterday from a colleague of mine who's based in New Zealand, and the tone of the email was, "So is the office market in the U.S. as bad as everything I'm reading?" So it's a global discussion, I guess, is another way of putting it. So
Mhm.
why do you think that Fort Worth is not as much in a free fall as the rest of America?
Well, I think there's several reasons for it. I think one, like I said before, we don't have a whole lot of overbuilding that occurred. Our downtown is relatively small by compared to some other cities. There's one, two, three, four, probably about five tall office buildings, and they all have pretty decent leasing on them. I was at an event a couple weeks ago, and they said, if we had someone needed, a couple of 80,000 square foot spaces, we could probably make that work. If someone needed a couple 100,000 square feet, that's not there at the
Sure.
current time.
Sure.
I think also, we don't have a whole lot of really old buildings. A lot of our older office buildings have already been converted to residential or converted to hotels. There's probably about five or six previously office buildings that are hotels in downtown.
Hmm.
And then again, just the continued growth of the economy, a lot of people wanting to move to this area, and a lot of company growth. One thing I do want to say about the office apocalypse, and also a little plug for my own podcast,
Sure.
which is Location Cubed, a Weaver Beyond the Numbers podcast.
Yep.
Ever since the pandemic, I've been saying that you can't count office out. It's a long term play, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, there was so much job growth and so much company growth. I should say, so much company growth during the pandemic. Everybody who was sitting at home going, I can do this better, whatever this happens to be.
Hmm.
So much new companies that were started. And as a result, a lot of those companies are going to need office space at some point. Right now, they're probably in WeWork or Industrious or something like that. They're going to move into their own space, which will probably be B space to start with, and
Yep.
then move up to A space. So I feel like long term, I've been saying this, and I still feel this way. Don't count office out, but I also recognize that there is definitely the tale of two or three classes, and you're in a much better position if you happen to own an A property, obviously, than if you happen to own a B or a C property, and probably that differential is so much more than it had been historically.
Yeah, and maybe to build on it for my thought or question, not to throw out a leading question here, but I mean the location of the office stuff really matters. I think in the wake of COVID, people are saying, well, if I am going to go into an office, is there something 5 minutes from my house in the burbs rather than do I drag my tail all the way down to the CBD?
Hmm.
And so I think that's probably a factor. I run a co-working business, which is in a nice suburb in northern New Jersey, and pretty much everyone in the space used to commute into the city, and then found at the same time that just working out of their home was not mentally healthy and needed a place to go. And so here I am in a co-working location in northern Jersey
Yeah,
that we built out.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
One of the things that we're, I think, also fortunate about here in Fort Worth, and really in DFW as a whole, is we're not so dense that traffic is horrible. We
hmm,
have our spots, don't get me wrong, but
sure,
I live probably about 30 miles out in the suburbs, and it takes me probably about 40 minutes to get to work. I've got friends that are in New York that live 20 miles out, and it takes them an hour and a half on the bus. And
yeah,
so,
that's
we're kind
a
of
good point.
fortunate in that the commutes aren't that bad, especially here in Fort Worth. Probably a large number of our people live within 25, 30 minutes of the city, or of the office, yet they still are out in the country to a great extent. And some people literally out in the country.
Well, and that's a great point. There is a sweet spot for commuting. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the killing line is, but there's some point at which 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, fine. Once you get to an hour, no. Like
Yeah.
especially because the risk is stating the obvious, you got to go both ways, right? So
Yeah.
there's a point at which it
Rainy days
becomes
are never fun. I'll tell you that.
right. There's a point at which it becomes unsustainable.
Hmm.
I mean, look,
Hmm.
I'm based in northern Jersey. We're worst case scenario in terms of commuting time into the central business district. I had to go into the city yesterday for a meeting, and I engineer all of my meetings so I will not be at rush hour. Whereas I think in other markets, eh, you'll manage. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not as big of a deal. It's not as big of a deal. No, that's interesting. So office market is doing okay. Your point about regulation or your point about other markets, I mean, you mentioned other areas in Texas. Houston is legendary for having just no approvals in place for anything, which means
No
everyone can
zoning.
build.
That's correct.
No zoning, so everyone can build everything at all times. Um, a colleague of mine many years ago had an example, a slide deck. I don't think I ever told you this. A slide deck of photos of things you could build in Houston that you couldn't build anywhere else in America. And
I
it
would love to
was
see that.
the one slide that stuck with me. If I can get a copy of it, I'll send it to you. The one slide that stuck with me, and this is a little not safe for work, but it's funny. It had all these photos of like a factory next to houses and this sort of thing. And he had one photo which was of an adult strip club across the street from a junior high school. You know,
That's actually kind of surprising because I know there are some rules about adult oriented businesses close to schools and churches and things like
Maybe
that.
they changed the rules at one point, but at one point it was his example of like, and this is why you need some controls. You could not just be a lawless world,
Right.
you know.
It's really more the funny thing is when you have like this residential neighborhood of single family houses, and on the other side of the backyard of one is like a 20-story high rise condo,
Right,
or an
right.
auto repair shop or something like that. That's where it gets a little crazy. But
Yeah,
you spend
truck
enough time in
traffic.
Houston, you recognize it's just interesting.
No, hey, I appreciate it. And as a native New Yorker, I just always have to stop myself from calling it Houston. That's my problem. But
That is true because y'all have that street there.
we have Houston Street, which apparently a colleague of mine who's a historian has said to me. Apparently, there is some evidence that, based on accents, that Sam Houston actually may have pronounced it Houston, not Houston. But I will not say that when I'm in your home state.
I wouldn't
Um,
recommend it.
just just saying there is some historical evidence. But anyway. So nonetheless, so office market is good. How? What about other markets? What are you seeing in terms of
I
other
mean,
things?
uh, really, in general, pretty much everything is. Because we're growing a lot. We have a lot of outward growth because people basically, we at some point Oklahoma City is going to be a northern suburb of Dallas Fort Worth.
Hmm.
Things are continuing to grow towards north up towards Oklahoma, and west out towards west of Fort Worth,
Sure.
east of Dallas. There's a lot of residential master plan communities, which is going to bring in a lot of retail. So that's being very helpful. Being in the center of the country with DFW Airport and with the Alliance Airport at Hillwood, two intermodal train yards, one northwest of Fort Worth, one southeast of Dallas. It's a great transportation hub. So as you can imagine, the industrial market is on fire. Probably
Right.
one of the bigger challenges we have in the industrial market is finding enough good land to build million-square-foot warehouses. And then, multifamily, again, as house prices continue to go up and interest rates stay up and people aren't selling houses, people aren't buying houses, need a
Right.
place to live. And so there's still, multifamilies going well. Probably the biggest challenge with multifamily, which doesn't necessarily affect obviously the renters, but has been just, what you're hearing about with a lot of the deals that tried to fix and flip and then got kind of hung up on the interest rates, hung up on the market rates not going up what they expected, and so a lot of angst in that market.
Sure.
But the when I was at an event about 6 months ago, the the commentary there was primarily that everyone has kind of stopped on development, letting all that kind of settle in. And so expectation is if you were to start something today, you might hit a home run, because in a couple of years, we get to 26 or so, late 25 into 26, there's going to be a need for a lot more supply in the apartment market.
No, and that's interesting. I mean, it's funny. We a lot of times. I mean, I've got listeners from all over the place, and the reoccurring theme in a lot of these conversations about markets is just remembering how gosh darn big the country is, and that while part of the country could be suffering in many ways, the rest could be just going like gangbusters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to me. I mean, interest rates are national, but markets are local. So you get these weird examples of healthy markets, while meanwhile interest rates are double what they were, which really should have killed everything. But yet certain markets function. And
Right.
your point about political environment is well taken. I mean, there is a lot to be said for a lack of regulation and what have you. I mean, I'm not again, I don't believe in having a lawless society, but the more hurdles you put up, the more you're going to slow stuff down, and
Correct. Correct.
that just kind of makes
And
sense.
and the best thing was I remember one of my really great friends, probably my best friend at work, moved here from Chicago. I took him on a tour, just driving around,
Hmm.
and I made the comment, well, 2 months ago that wasn't there, you
Sure.
know, 6 months ago that wasn't there, and he didn't believe it because he was used to Chicago where everything would take forever to get done. And
Hmm.
after he'd been here for about 6 months, he's like, okay, now I believe it because he watched a highway go from being maybe 2 miles south of his house to about 15 miles north of his house in a 6 month period.
Sure.
And he's like,
Sure.
you just don't do this up north. And
You
so
can't.
he
Well,
he, he was able to see it.
you have entrenched interests. No, I mean I've done some work in Phoenix, and it's the same sort of madness where
Yeah, yeah,
it was desert and now it's golf courses. So obviously your day job, if you will, you're running a team of accountants. So
correct.
as So what's going on with your firm in terms of growth? Because well, a lot of times, to sort of prime this, a lot of times for me as a user of accounting services, I don't really think about the business of accounting. So what's going on from a business of accounting standpoint?
Well, it's exciting times to be an accountant. I don't know if people are probably choking when they hear someone say something like that,
Those words
but
usually don't go together. Yeah, fair enough.
go
Fair
figure.
enough.
Creative accountant, that doesn't go well together
Creative
either.
accounting. I know. I know. I know.
So, but no, it's real. It truly is interesting times. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing. I'll start with our firm. Our
Hmm.
firm is just we're blowing and going. We've made a few acquisitions recently. Probably the last two large ones have been about a year ago. We bought a firm in Pasadena, California. And so picked up a number of partners and a lot of people with that. And then most recently bought a firm in New York. That was January 1st, which gave us a bigger footprint than what we had there. That being said, our organic growth has been very, very strong as well. We've made some pretty big partner classes recently. And so in for example, I can say when I started with the firm back in 2020, right before the pandemic,
Okay.
and we probably had about 110 partners. Right now, we're just short of 200. And that's in a 4 year period. And I would say of those, that increase of 90, I would say probably about maybe 30 or 40 were from purchases, which means we've probably gotten 50% growth in our partner ranks just from organic growth. Um,
Now, what's the
which
benefit of buying an accounting practice? I mean, you guys are operating. When you add on an accounting practice, obviously you grow the revenue, you grow the head count, but
mhm.
strategically, what's the benefit?
From us, it's probably been more of a geographic strategic situation
Okay.
because of the fact that, again, we're predominantly in Texas.
Hmm.
Of our 21 offices, I want to say probably about 10 or so are here in Texas, and it's probably about 70% of our operations. And so in buying the firms in New York was an opportunity to get a bigger footprint in New York.
Right.
And the same thing in California is we had some offices in California, but they were primarily on the investment fund side. And so we wanted to get
Mm.
more into a traditional commercial practice. And so we find some firms that usually the issue is succession, where you've got some older partners who are trying to retire and
Sure.
maybe younger partners who can't quite foot the bill to make that happen. And we're in a good spot to take care of that and bring on new people, get into new markets and see where we can go with it. It's been a very successful strategy for our firm because most of our early growth was through buying firms to grow geographically.
Got it. Got it. And then in theory, I guess at some point you can take on bigger and bigger clients who like the idea that you have an office here and an office there.
Correct. I mean, when you tell people that you have, you're based in Texas and you have 1,000 people, that's going to have a certain types of clients that people would associate that with. When you
Sure.
say that you're coast to coast and you have 2,000, 3,000 people, people are like, okay, they have the bandwidth to be able to take on a bigger client,
Right.
and that's part of the direction that we're trying to go is to get larger clients by, having that bandwidth, having that expertise.
Right.
Um, so that's been kind of our story is we've been doing a lot of that internal organic growth with some small acquisitions, but probably the really big story in the accounting world these days is private equity. There's a number of firms that have gotten private equity investments.
Hmm.
Uh, for example, I think like Citron Cooperman did that. I think just recently Baker Tilly announced that, and several others. And so what's happening is that private equity firm can't own an audit firm. So the firms are
Okay.
generally splitting into two pieces, one being traditional audit and tax to an extent, the other side being the consulting. Whereas the private equity is making the investment more on the consulting firm, with the audit firm being owned by the partners. It gives the firms, a big cash infusion, gives some of the older partners an opportunity to cash out potentially, but also helps them to make investments and to be able to grow that way. Um,
I guess my question there, and that's not dissimilar from the legal profession. Same thing.
mhm.
Law partners have to run the firm. You can't, I can't run a law firm if somebody's not a lawyer. But I guess when I think about private equity shops, I always ask, what's the exit? So are they thinking they're just going to roll a bunch of these guys up to a national, or like how do they get out? 5 years down the road?
That's a really good question. I would suspect it's going to be some type. Either you're going to just keep selling private equity to private equity to private equity, or you're going to
Okay.
do some type of a big roll up. If you recall, last summer EY tried to do a big transaction where they
Hmm.
were looking to basically spin off their advisory arm to be a public company, kind of similar to an Accenture,
Hmm.
something like that. And I felt like if you put it in perspective, that was just another big, similar to a private equity transaction. It's just a matter of EY was too big of a firm that a private equity could get their arms around that. So they had to do it more through a spin-off and,
Right.
go into the
EY could just
public
do it
markets that way.
themselves. They
Yeah,
could just
yeah,
take their own slice.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's not, our firm's philosophy is that's not for us. We're,
Sure.
on too good of a growth path right now. We're able to make investments. We're able to continue to grow. So we're continuing down the path that we're on, and not, um, nothing from a private equity, at least as far as I've been told.
No, it's interesting. I mean, again, usually when I talk to real estate folk, we see the accounting groups, I mean, we use your services, but we're not thinking about the
Hmm.
business of accounting.
Right.
I have had personal experience of, being with using a small firm, and then the small firm gets absorbed, and then their fees magically change. And then I'm like, well, heck, like I liked working with you guys when your price was X and now it's Y, and I'm going to go have to find a smaller firm because I'm a little guy and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. But that just happens. Um, what about incoming talent? Like, what's going on that side?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge that we have, and it's not just us. That's just the accounting profession as a whole. There's just less people in college wanting to be accountants. I feel like when I did it many years ago, I was probably near like the big wave of people who wanted to go into accounting. Interestingly enough, I never really wanted to go into accounting. I just fell into it, and it turned out
Hmm,
to be the best thing that could have happened. But it's there's a couple of roadblocks there. Number one is it's not a sexy profession. It's not like being a doctor where you get to go save lives, not like
sure,
being a firefighter where you get to go put out fires.
right.
And
No,
part
no
of
one's
that
thanking
is,
you for your service. No, I
right,
understand.
people thank us for our service, but it's not really the same.
You know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah,
you're not.
not the dramatic thank yous.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
but and so part of it also is how many TV shows are there about accountants, and if there are any, how many are we in a good light?
Oh,
So
I've said the same thing. I have a very short list of films or books in which real estate developers are not evil, and it's like there's literally like only
I'm
three or
surprised there's any.
no, there's only like 3 or 4 examples where the real estate developer is not evil, and the filmmaker actually tried to show real estate development as it actually is. There's one movie called Sunshine State. It was an independent film from like 20 years ago, and the developer's definitely a little bit evil, but they try to show it like practically what does it look like to be a real estate developer. But
Mhm.
again, it's a very short list. It's a very short list.
No, no,
Um,
I get that. So that's part of the issue. Part of the issue too is a lot of the states require 150 hours in order to sit for the CPA exam or get licensed. That's 150 college credit
so
hours.
that's
Uh,
5 year program.
5-year program. So
Okay.
what's happened in Texas? They just this last legislature they actually reduced the exam qualification requirement from 150 to 120 hours, yet
Hmm.
still requiring 150 hours to actually get licensed. And so.
Hmm.
So basically, the way it usually works, or it has been working, is a lot of the college students they'll go through 3 years, 4 years of school. They'll get what's known as a PPA, which is, I think, professional practice in accounting degree. I'm probably
Okay.
getting that wrong. I'm old school. I just have a bachelor's. I only went
Sure.
4 years,
That's what I
and
thought they were called. Sure.
yeah,
Sure.
and so what ends up happening is usually like in their fifth year they'll intern. So we get lots and lots and lots of interns, and usually it's a paid internship, and you also
Sure.
get college credit for doing the internship, and then they go back, finish up their last year, and if all goes well, they come and join us when they graduate.
Sure.
So what I think is going to happen is, but then they have once that they're at that point, then they can start sitting for the CPA exam, get licensed, and continue to move on in their career. But having to go through those 5 years of school is somewhat daunting, especially if you're, don't have the resources to be able to afford it. If you're taking out student loans, if your family,
Sure.
isn't as, isn't in a higher income bracket. So you think, okay, well, I can go to school for 5 years to be an accountant. I can go to school for 4 years to be an engineer.
Right.
and so it's like, what do I want to do?
One
Well,
extra
one
year
less year of
does
school
matter.
sounds great,
Right.
so that's where I think some of the rule changes are happening. And then what I predict will happen is people will get their 4 years, they'll start sitting for the exam, and my expectation is they'll get not 100% sure how it'll work, but if I had to guess, I would say that we're going to have a lot of people who are going to start working with their 4 year degree, studying for the exam, as well as maybe taking classes in the evening or during the summers in order to get the last 30 hours so then they can actually get licensed.
Right.
Or, there's been some proposals with the AICPA about having some type of getting credit for actual work experience, which will help go towards the 150 hours. So I think a lot of that's still to be determined.
But what you're talking about, though, this is really right now. I mean, this 120, 150 thing. That's a state of Texas thing, and not all the
Well,
states have done
each
that.
state has their own different requirements, and I'd
Right.
say the majority of states are at 150.
Okay.
And so I think, like I said, Texas, and again, remember, it's still 150 hours to get licensed. So,
Okay.
all the states are going to be equivalent in terms of their licensing because of what we have called CPA mobility, which means I can basically work in other states with my Texas license. I don't have
Right.
to get
It's
a license in other states to do that, like say a lawyer would, or a real estate broker or someone like that.
getting admitted to the
Um,
bar. Yeah. Cross
right.
registration.
Right. But I do think that the individual states are probably going to end up getting to the same place because ultimately, you'll get a level playing field one way or another.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the work study stuff. I mean, I've taught at the graduate level. I've taught in Columbia University's Masters in Real Estate program since like '05 as an adjunct prof. So it's been a while. Um, and people sometimes ask me what the benefit of a graduate degree is, and it's kind of a weird place because again, I've been teaching in a graduate school for 20 years, and my short answer is it depends. I
Mhm.
mean, like, I'm not I'm not, while I love education, education comes in different forms, and there's a lot to be said for work study. I think the challenge for a lot of universities has just been that it's messier. It's just easier to say, we'll just come to school for another year than to actually try to figure out how you work with industry and
Mhm.
build
Mhm.
partnerships and that sort of stuff. And frankly, some universities just go the easy way because they can.
Right.
They don't want to try. And questions like, well, how does the student actually benefit? What's the actual goal here? I mean, not to ask a leading question, but like, what's your experience of the students now that they're doing this work study type thing
Well,
versus
no one's
just,
doing the work. No one's doing the work study thing. That's something I just foresee as
oh,
going to
for
happen.
C?
So
Okay,
right
because it
now
hasn't happened yet.
it's still kind of doing the internship, going back, and then coming back to work once they graduate. But we do have a few like long term interns in our office that are basically kind of we're keeping them on as a part time intern while they're going to
Sure.
school. So it's almost like a much better part time job than say working at the grocery store like I did or flipping burgers like I did. So
Yeah, no, I
I
get
would
you.
I would have loved to have been in an office, using my mind and not my body.
I know I definitely have a couple wretched jobs in my job career that, which were reminders of why I should finish and get my degree.
Well, I was gonna say it definitely, as my dad said, it's building character,
Building
and
character. I know. I know.
it's like okay, now I know why I finished college.
Yes, I'm a parent. I've had the character building conversation with my children at least a few times. So yeah, no, I get that. I get that.
So, and so there's the competition for the young folks. The big four firms obviously take on a huge amount of the students that are graduating from school because just by size, we'll have a starting class
They're
of
big.
7, they'll have a starting class of 70. And so we're competing with them from getting the college students. And so one of the things that's good about our firm is we have it's a different culture than a big four firm, different clients, and as they say, you know, different strokes for different folks. There's some people who would thrive in a big firm world, and others who would thrive in more of a weaver world. And so
Right.
part of the whole college recruiting is, and the interns is kind of saying, okay, here's an opportunity to work for us. Do you like the culture? Do you like the people? Do you like the work that we're doing? If so, come join us. If you go through that whole process and say, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do this here, that's the best time to figure it out rather
Sure.
than after you've already accepted a job and feel like you're kind of stuck.
Be a year
Um,
in and then say I don't want to be here.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and so and it goes both ways. So there's we get a lot of people that started from a Big Four standpoint, realized that they didn't want to deal with everything. A lot of great experience there. I'm former Big Four myself, so I'll admit it's great experience, but it's a grind.
Right.
It's working for a big company with a lot of bureaucracy, and generally higher expectations in terms of the volume of work that you're going to be doing, and hours and so on and so forth. And so some people are like, I don't want that. Younger people are definitely more into the work life balance than I ever was. But I'm a product of my time, so I totally understand that, and I respect what the young people want to get out of their lives. That it's not all about work, and we're in fortunately, the way our firm is structured and the way our clients are is we're able to give them that.
So let me throw out another question, which is a little bit of a left field question, but it's something I've been asking people from different disciplines. So there's been a lot of conversation about AI, ChatGPT, Dolly, all these technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Impact on the accounting profession or no? Short
I think
term,
a
long
little.
term?
I
Just
mean, I think
curious.
a little soon to tell.
Okay.
Whenever when you say long term, short term, I always think of one thing, a quote from Bill Gates. Basically, everybody overestimates the power of a new invention over a year and completely underestimates the power of a new invention over 10 years.
Sure. Sure.
So, taking that into consideration, I mean, I think the AI is going to be. It again depends on what you use it for. If I had an associate that wanted to use AI to write a tick mark or write a memo or something like that, that would be good. And if they can figure out a way to do that efficiently and still have it not hallucinate on you,
Right. Here's the
um,
data. Write
yeah,
something based on this data. Sure.
right, and make that work. I think that's good because again, as we're continuing to get less and less people, just by virtue of less accountants out there, we need to be more efficient with the people that we do have,
Sure.
and give them better opportunities so that they'll want to stick around. But on the other hand, I can see also, when ChatGPT first came out, I tried to write an article, something real estate related, and it came out like a really good article, and our marketing team thought it was a good article, but they were completely freaking out because they had no way to know what was ours versus what was someone else's and
Sure.
how to attribute it and all that stuff. So I think I was talking with a friend of mine on our podcast, and he was talking about AI, and he was talking about making sure that you're controlling your own data, your own information. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of firms end up having like a private chat GPT, for lack of a better word,
Sure.
that's going to
Sure.
be all of our data, all of our documents, all of our thoughts we're going to have on our network, and then we'll be able to use it to create new thought leadership and stuff using our stuff, so we know where it came from and we know it's ours.
Yeah, there's one client that I do some work with on a consulting basis, which is a large real estate money manager, pension fund advisor type group, and they're basically got all the data sitting in a data pool, data warehouse type
Mm-hmm.
situation, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're like, we've got all this data for all these properties, all these clients that we manage. Let's ask questions of the system, and then it's our own internal guru, if you will, to identify trends and this sort of thing.
Right.
Um,
And I think one thing that'll help us out from just the auditing is, the auditing in particular, is a lot of our work, especially for our younger people, is finding that needle in a haystack. And
yeah,
then, but look, how much do you have to look at to find something that, so everything is okay or notice something's not okay?
sure, spot
And I think
checking,
we're,
looking for things that are errors, looking for things
right,
that jump out at you.
our
Yeah,
sample of 100 items or something to make sure
right.
nothing pops up. And I think one thing, we've used it with some level of analytics, but also with AI, is going to help us to a point where we can, download an entire GL, and the AI system will go, okay, entries 6, 7, and 162 look funny. Look at those.
Right.
And then we can be much more targeted in terms of what we're looking at. But it's never going to replace, at least I hope not, never going to replace the level of judgment and experience, to look at something, to talk to someone about what happened, to know whether, is this okay or not.
No, but flagging errors would be a wonderful use. I mean,
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
run my own business, and I'd love it if my accounting system could say, "Hey, Josh, this just from a bookkeeping standpoint, hey, this number looks wrong." Just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you entered it, you fat fingered it, you put in 100, it's probably 10. Did you mean to do that? That would be lovely. The same way I have spell check on Word.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, no, that's a great point. It is interesting watching this evolution of a new technology, and your point about tech implementation and how long it actually takes. It's
Yeah.
a process. It's a process. So, last question. I always like to ask everyone who comes on. So, for good or bad, nothing ever works out as expected because life has a sense. There's an old saying that man plans and God laughs.
Hmm.
Things
Hmm.
do not happen as expected. So, best or worst surprise on it could be buying a firm, growing the firm, working with a client. Any amusing anecdotes you'd like to share,
Oh,
for
good
good or for
heavens.
bad?
Probably. Oh, let me think about that for a second. Um, Probably I would say best surprise has really been. I mean, I'm just going to give a totally
Don't worry, it's fine.
blatant shout out to my team here. I
That's
have
fine.
an amazing team at my firm. My firm is amazing. All my partners are amazing, but the real estate construction practice that I lead up is phenomenal. We've got a lot of really great, talented, hungry people that want to go out and, number one, deliver the best client service that they can. Number two, treat their coworkers with respect, dignity, help them to learn and to grow. I'm going through our core values here, it seems like.
Sure, don't worry,
And
it's fine.
third,
It's all good.
to grow the practice.
Hmm.
And so when I took over the practice, probably after I'd been here for about 6 months, I kind of had to feel what to expect, but I didn't expect the level of commitment, the level of growth, and the quality of a team that I have. And so they're just, I'm so proud to be able to lead them and to help lead the growth that our practice has had. And so that's probably been my best surprise, especially from a fun standpoint.
As someone who's managed people and been managed by people, it is always a pleasant surprise when you come on board somewhere and things are working and the culture is positive. I mean, I've had clients from a consulting standpoint. You've obviously had a lot of clients from an accounting standpoint. And there have been firms that I've worked with that are joy, and firms that I've worked with that I wonder why everybody doesn't just quit because they're clearly also miserable. I don't know why
Mm-hmm.
any of them are there because they just all seem unhappy. So yeah, no, it's always a blessing when you get to work somewhere where you're like, hey, people have their heads screwed on right and we're moving in the right direction. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's genuinely cool. No,
So
it's
let
good
me
stuff.
let me ask you a question. So
Shoot.
since you've been doing the podcast, what's been your biggest surprise?
It's an interesting question. The first is just how many that everybody does have a story to tell, and it's been a lot of fun to talk to people in very different disciplines and get to look at the same problem from all the different angles. I've really enjoyed that. It's the old thing about like the three blind men and they touch different parts of the elephant and they think it's a
Mm-hmm.
different animal or something. That's been really enjoyable. I've also really enjoyed just seeing how passionate people are about things that I am not passionate about. I mean, there's certain things do not fill me with joy and wonder. And it's always great to talk to someone who's like, I have joy and wonder about this subject. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing. It's been interesting also how many people want to tell their story. Like when I first started the podcast, I went out to a bunch of people. I was like, well, I'm going to reach out to, 50 people and 10 will say yes. And it's like, no, you got to 50 people and 40 people are like, yes, I want to tell my story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's been interesting watching the response. And I've had to moderate how aggressively I go out to find new people because at this point I have so many people that want to be on the pod that I don't have to do that. Um, yeah, but it's been fun. It's been fun. Without getting too into my own personal backstory, my grandfather did talk radio for years,
Oh,
and
very cool. That's where you get
and
the voice from, I think.
thank you, thank you. Now I'm aware of it, but no, he did talk radio for his entire life, and died like literally like he was broadcasting up until his death essentially. Um, and I understand why he did it for a life.
Hmm.
He loved his life. He met interesting people. He talked about cool things, and he got paid to chat with people. There are a lot worse ways to spend your time. So
That's for sure.
so Anyway,
Good
well,
deal.
good. Thank you for the question. It's always good to be on the other side. So, so for everyone who's been listening again, this has been Josh Kahr speaking with Howard Altshuler at Weaver, and their website is obvious, but I'll say it anyway. It's weaver.com. If in case anyone wants to check them out regarding accounting services in various markets, and yeah, Howard, thanks again for joining me. This has been lovely.
I've really enjoyed it myself too. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks.